9 out of 10 people who tell you they want to be rich will still be working the exact same job, earning the exact same salary 5 years from today. Not because they're unlucky, not because the system rigged the game against them, even though plenty of people will tell you that's the whole story. It's because of one decision they never actually made, sitting quietly at the start of a process almost nobody explains properly. I built my way to real financial independence in my 20s, not through some viral idea or a lucky trade, but by going through 5 specific stages in order. The same 5 stages I've since watched play out in almost everyone I know who actually made it, and almost everyone who didn't. Skip one of these, or do them out of order, and you can work twice as hard as someone else and still end up nowhere close to where they land. Stay with me through all 5, because the last one is the stage that decides whether you end up rich or whether you end up wealthy. And those 2 words do not mean the same thing. Stage 1, the fog. Most people spend their 20s in what I call the fog, not because they're lazy, because nobody ever forces them to actually choose a direction, so they just keep moving without one. You know this stage if you've ever caught yourself bouncing from one idea to the next. A few months into learning video editing, then you hear someone made real money reselling sneakers, so you try that for a bit. Then a coworker mentions day trading, and you open an account you use twice. None of it is wrong exactly. The problem isn't the ideas. The problem is that you never stayed with any single one long enough to find out if it actually worked, because staying with something means risking being wrong about it, and being wrong feels worse than staying vague. Here's the uncomfortable part. Life doesn't pause while you're in the fog. It keeps moving, and if you don't point yourself somewhere specific, you drift toward whatever's easiest, which is usually just staying comfortable enough to never really test yourself. I've met people in their 30s still describing themselves as figuring things out, and what they're actually describing is 10 years of fog that quietly became a decade. Getting out of the fog isn't about finding the perfect idea. It's about picking one that's good enough and refusing to abandon it the second it gets difficult, because difficulty is the first sign you've finally left the fog behind and started doing something real. Stage 2, the lock-in. Here's where most people sabotage themselves without realizing it. They finally pick a direction and then immediately try to build 6 other things at the same time. I talk to people constantly who tell me they're serious about building wealth, but in the same breath mention they're also training for a half marathon, learning piano, trying to read 50 books this year, and picking up a new language on an app. Every one of those goals is fine on its own. Stacked together, they guarantee that none of them gets the kind of obsessive attention that actually produces results. Getting genuinely good at making money is hard enough as a single focus. It doesn't survive being goal number 4 on a list of 7. This is the stage I call the lock-in, and it's less about working 18-hour days and more about a mental decision to stop treating your financial goal as one hobby among many. When I was building my first real income stream in my early 20s, I dropped almost everything else for about 18 months. Not because balance doesn't matter, but because I understood that this specific window wouldn't come back, and spreading myself across a dozen mediocre efforts would have meant getting good at none of them. If the idea of that kind of focus makes you uncomfortable, sit with why. There's nothing wrong with wanting real financial independence badly enough to temporarily deprioritize things that can wait. The people who never allow themselves that kind of focus are almost always the same people still in the fog 5 years later, just busier about it. Stage 3, the copy. Once you've locked in, the next mistake is trying to invent your own path from scratch instead of finding someone who already built the one you need. This is where a lot of people get stuck, because they think building wealth requires some original insight, a business idea nobody's thought of, a trend they can catch before anyone else. That's rarely how it actually works. The far more reliable path is finding someone who's already doing, at a small scale, exactly what you want to be doing at a larger one, and figuring out precisely how they did it. Before I ever built anything of my own, I spent months working part-time for someone who already ran the kind of small business I eventually wanted to build myself. I wasn't there mainly for the paycheck. I was there to watch how he actually ran it, day to day. The parts that never show up in a success story, how he talked to customers, which mistakes cost him the most, what he wished he'd done differently in year 1. I wrote almost everything down. Most of what I learned in those months, I couldn't have found in any article or video, because it lived entirely in the specific, unglamorous details of someone actually doing the work. You don't need this person to be famous. In fact, it usually works better if they aren't, because someone with a smaller following is making their money directly from the skill itself, not from an audience they've built around themselves. Find them in your industry, at local events, in online communities built around the specific thing you want to learn. ask real questions. Pay attention to what they wish they'd known earlier. That's the shortcut nobody tells you about, because it isn't glamorous enough to go viral, but it's the fastest way past years of trial and error you'd otherwise have to pay for yourself. Stage 4. The force. Once you've found the pathway, the only thing left to do is the part everyone wants to skip, which is actually doing the reps badly before you ever do them well. You are going to be bad at this in the beginning. That's not a warning, it's just a fact. And the sooner you accept it, the faster you move past it. If you are offering a service, your first few clients are going to get a rougher version of what you'll eventually offer. If you're building something to sell, your first version is going to have obvious flaws. That's fine. The reps are what turn the rough version into the good one, and there's no shortcut that skips this part entirely, no matter how good your starting pathway was. Here's what actually speeds this stage up, and it isn't just working more hours. It's getting real feedback from people who have no reason to protect your feelings. I see this constantly with people trying to build an audience online. They're convinced their content is strong, the algorithm just hasn't found them yet, and when I actually look at what they're making, it's clear the work simply isn't there yet. The reason they can't see it themselves is usually that they've only shown it to friends and family almost never tell you the truth, either because they don't want to hurt you or because they genuinely don't know enough to give you useful feedback in the first place. This stage tends to be lonely, and I won't pretend otherwise. You start pulling away from people who aren't chasing the same thing you are, not because you look down on them, but because your schedule and priorities have shifted in a direction most of your old circle isn't moving in. At the same time, you're not yet successful enough to naturally fit in with people further ahead of you. That gap is uncomfortable, and it's exactly where most people quietly give up and slide back into whatever's comfortable. The ones who make it through usually find a small group of people moving at roughly the same pace, chasing something similar, who can trade honest feedback without the politeness that ruins advice from people who love you but don't understand what you're building. Stage 5. The fork. And here's the stage that actually separates being rich from being wealthy. Two words people use interchangeably that describe two completely different outcomes. If you've made it through the first 4 stages, you eventually reach a point where real money starts coming in consistently. This is where a fork appears, and most people never notice they're standing at it until they've already made the choice without thinking about it. One direction leads towards spending that income on the visible signals of having made it: a nicer car, a bigger apartment, the kind of lifestyle upgrades that feel earned and, in a real sense, are earned. The other direction means reinvesting a meaningful chunk of that same money back into more income streams, more skills, more assets. While your visible lifestyle barely changes at all, neither path is inherently wrong, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but only one of them compounds. The person who takes the first path is genuinely rich in the sense that they have money and they're spending it on things they want. The person who takes the second path is building something closer to wealth, income streams and assets that keep generating money, whether they're actively working or not, growing quietly while the version of them still stuck in the fog 5 years ago would barely recognize how far things have moved. I've watched people hit real income for the first time and blow through almost all of it within a year, convinced the money would just keep showing up at the same pace forever. It usually doesn't work that way. Markets shift, industries change. The specific thing that worked for you stops working as well as it used to. The people who reinvested a real percentage of their early income, even when it felt boring compared to spending it, are the ones who are still standing a decade later, when the thing that made them their first real money has slowed down or disappeared entirely. This is the actual finish line, except it isn't a finish line at all. It's a decision point you'll keep facing over and over. Every time more money comes in than you're used to having, choose to reinvest more often than you choose to spend. And the 4 stages before this, once start compounding into something that looks less like a good year and more like an entirely different life. 5 stages. The fog, where most people quietly spend years without ever noticing. The lock-in, where you finally choose one direction and stop spreading yourself across a dozen half-efforts. The copy, where you stop trying to invent everything yourself and find someone who already built the path. The reps, where you get good at the thing by being genuinely bad at it first, in front of people who will actually tell you the truth. And the fork, where the money you've finally earned either turns into a nicer life today or a completely different life 10 years from now. Most people never make it past past the first stage. A smaller number make it through the second and third. Fewer still survive the lonely stretch of stage 4, and the ones who reach stage 5 and actually choose to reinvest instead of spend are rarer than any of the others combined. If you made it this far in the video, you're probably further along than you think. Subscribe if you want to see exactly how each of these stages plays out in real detail, because that's exactly what the next few videos on this channel are going to cover.